palace guards found handler veteran's body in the morning. What remained of him, anyway? The dreadm had torn through the reinforced cage bars like they were made of paper, and the handler had not died quickly. It was the 7th death in 8 months, and Emperor Vakthal was running out of patience. The beast paced in its enclosure now, a massive creature of midnight black scales and burning amber eyes. It stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, with muscles that rippled like steel cables beneath its armored hide. Rows of crystalline fangs lined its jaw, each one sharp enough to pierce starship hull plating. The dreadm was a perfect killing machine, bred on a death world where everything fought to survive. It was supposed to be the Emperor's ultimate symbol of power. Instead, it had become his greatest embarrassment. Kelvin, the master of beasts, stood before the Emperor's throne with his head bowed. The old handler had trained war creatures for 40 years, but even he had no answer for this problem. 2 weeks, the Emperor said, his voice cold as deep space. The Grand Summit begins in 2 weeks. Every major power in the galaxy will be here. I promised them a demonstration of imperial might. Instead, I have a beast that kills everyone who approaches it. My lord, we have tried everything, Kelvin replied. Pain compliance, neural conditioning, pheromone control. The creature resists all standard methods. Perhaps it would be wiser to destroy it and select a different specimen for the summit. The Emperor's claws tapped against his throne. And show weakness? Admit that the Imperium cannot tame a simple animal? No. Find me someone who can control this beast, or I will find a new master of beasts. Kelvin left the throne room with fear tight in his chest. He had no solutions left. Every expert in the galaxy had failed. The dreadm seemed to grow more violent with each attempt to break its will. That same afternoon, the diplomatic wing of the palace conducted routine tours for newly arrived species representatives. Among them was a human named Joe, recently assigned as Earth's assistant liaison to Throne Prime. He was not important enough to meet the Emperor directly, but the palace staff included him in the standard orientation tours. Most aliens barely noticed him. Humans were new to the galactic community, considered weak and unremarkable by the established powers. Joe had not wanted this job. Back on Earth, he had been a veterinarian in Sol, working with everything from house pets to zoo animals. When the government selected him for off-world service, he could not refuse. His language skills and animal experience made him valuable for diplomatic work, they said. Mostly, he just felt out of place among beings who saw his entire species as insignificant. The tour guide, a board functionary named Pelkax, led the group through the palace menagerie. Creatures from 100 worlds were kept here, each more impressive than the last. The guide barely paused at most enclosures, rushing through his memorized speech, but when they reached the dreadm's holding area, he stopped completely. The Emperor's personal war beast, Pelkax announced. The most dangerous predator ever captured alive. It has killed 7 handlers and remains untamed. Through the triple-layered force fields, Joe could see the creature. It was pacing back and forth along the same path over and over. Its tail lashed against the walls, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal. Every few moments it would charge the barriers, testing them, searching for weakness. The other diplomats murmured with appropriate fear and respect. But Joe watched the beast's movements with different eyes. He saw the pattern in its pacing. He noticed how its pupils were fully dilated despite the bright lights. He watched how it startled at sudden sounds and how it kept its back to the wall. "It's terrified," Joe said quietly. Pelkax turned to him with confusion. "What did you say, human? The beast? It's not aggressive. It's afraid." Several diplomats laughed. The guide's expression showed clear contempt. "Afraid? It has killed 7 trained handlers. It attacks anything that enters its enclosure. Because it's defending itself," Joe insisted. He pointed at the creature. "Look at its posture. That's a fear response, not predatory behavior. Something has traumatized it." Before Pelkax could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. The dreadm had somehow damaged its containment field. Sparks flew from the control panels as the creature slammed against the weakening barriers. Palace guards rushed into position, weapons raised. "Evacuate the area," Pelkax shouted, herding the diplomats toward the exit. But Joe moved closer to the observation window, studying the beast. He could see fresh wounds beneath its scales, burns from shock weapons. Older scars covered its hide. This creature had been hurt repeatedly by those who were supposed to train it. No wonder it attacked anyone who came near. Kelvin arrived with a squad of beast handlers. They carried heavy neural whips and tranquilizer cannons. "Stand back," the master of beasts ordered. "We must sedate it before it breaks free." "You're going to make it worse," Joe said. Kelvin glared at the human. "Who are you to question imperial beast handling methods? Someone who actually understands animals." Joe surprised himself with his own boldness. "You're using pain to control it. That's why it keeps fighting back. You're reinforcing its fear response." "Ridiculous. Fear is the foundation of all beast training. The creature must know its place." "Then why hasn't it worked?" Joe challenged. 7 dead handlers. 8 months of failure. Your methods aren't working." The containment field flickered again. The dreadnought roared, a sound that shook the walls. It was moments away from breaking through. Guards charged their weapons, ready to kill it if necessary. "Let me try," Joe heard himself say. The entire room fell silent. Kelvin stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You want to enter that enclosure? Give me 10 minutes with it alone. No weapons, no pain devices. Just me and the beast. It will kill you in seconds, human." "Maybe. But if I'm right, I can calm it down. If I'm wrong, you lose 1 minor diplomat instead of your emperor's prize war beast. Either way, you come out ahead." Kelvin considered this. The human had a point. Better to lose 1 foolish alien than destroy the dreadnought and face the emperor's wrath. And if, by some miracle, the human succeeded, Kelvin would claim credit for the innovative solution. "Very well," the master of beasts said. "But we do this properly. The emperor must approve such foolishness." Within the hour, Joe stood before Emperor Vakthal himself. The throne room was filled with curious courtiers, all eager to see if the human would be permitted his suicidal request. The emperor regarded Joe with the same interest one might show an unusual insect. "You believe you can tame my dreadnought?" the emperor asked. "I believe I can help it." "Yes, help it." The emperor's laugh was not kind. "It is a weapon, human. A symbol of power. It does not need help. With respect, your majesty, it needs help very badly. Otherwise, it wouldn't keep killing people." The courtiers gasped at Joe's bluntness. One did not speak so directly to the emperor, but Vakthal seemed amused rather than angry. "Very well, human. I will give you 10 minutes in the enclosure. No weapons, no protection. If you succeed, you will have earned my attention. If you fail, you will be just another creature that underestimated the dreadnought's fury. Either way, I will be entertained." Joe bowed, his heart pounding. What had he just agreed to? An hour later, he stood at the entrance to the dreadnought's enclosure. Through the force field, he could see the massive beast watching him with those burning amber eyes. It knew he was coming. It was waiting. The guard at the control panel looked at Joe with pity. "Any last words, human?" Joe thought of his clinic back in Seoul, of all the frightened animals he had helped over the years. He thought of his grandmother, who had taught him that gentleness was not weakness. "Just open the door," he said. The force field dropped. The dreadnought roared, and Joe walked inside. The dreadnought's roar shook the reinforced walls. Above the enclosure, every dignitary, guard, and observer in the observation gallery expected to see Joe die within seconds. Emperor Vakthal leaned forward on his throne, curious to see how quickly the foolish human would fall. But Joe did not charge forward. He did not try to appear dominant or threatening. Instead, he did something that made no sense to anyone watching. He sat down right there, just inside the entrance. Joe lowered himself to the floor and sat cross-legged. He did not make eye contact with the beast. He did not speak in the imperial common tongue. Instead, he began talking quietly in Korean, his native language from Earth. He said softly, "It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you. The dreadm stopped mid-roar, confused. Every handler before had come at it with weapons, with pain, with dominance displays. The small creature was just sitting there, not even looking at it directly. The beast's instinct screamed that this was a trap. It snarled, lowering its head, preparing to charge. Joe kept talking, his voice steady and calm. I know you're scared. I know they hurt you, but I'm not here to hurt you. I promise. Minutes passed. The dreadm paced, never taking its eyes off the human. It would move closer, then retreat, testing and waiting for the trap to spring. But Joe just sat there, occasionally glancing at the beast from the corner of his eye, never staring directly. In the observation gallery, Krellin shook his head. The human wastes time with talking. The creature does not understand words. But Emperor Vakthal held up a hand for silence. Look at the beast's posture. It has not attacked. It was true. 5 minutes had passed, and the dreadm had not charged. It was still aggressive, still defensive, but it had not tried to kill the human. This was already longer than any previous handler had survived in direct contact. Joe slowly reached into his pocket. Guards raised their weapons, but he only pulled out a piece of dried meat from his lunch ration. Moving very slowly, telegraphing every motion, he tossed the food toward the dreadm. Not at it, but near it. An offering, not a challenge. The beast sniffed the air, then the meat. It was hungry. The handlers had been withholding food to make it more compliant. Another failed control tactic. The dreadm snatched up the meat and retreated to its corner, watching the human warily. Joe tossed another piece, this one not quite as far. Then another, gradually creating a trail. Each time, the dreadm had to come a little closer to get the food. Each time, Joe remained calm and non-threatening. Slowly, he murmured. That's it. You're doing great. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. The observers began to whisper among themselves. This was unprecedented. The human was still alive, and the beast seemed to be calming down. His pacing had stopped. Its pupils were no longer fully dilated with fear and rage. Joe noticed the wounds now up close. Burns from shock weapons covered the beast's hide. There were infected areas where the scales had been damaged, never properly treated. Fresh injuries overlapped old scars. This creature had been tortured in the name of training. Ah, Pungala, Joe said gently. I know it hurts. Let me help you. Very slowly, he extended his hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. He was not reaching for the beast, just offering it his scent. It was a technique he had used with frightened dogs and aggressive zoo animals back on Earth. Let them come to you. Let them make the choice. The dreadm's nostrils flared, taking in the human smell. It had never encountered a human before. This creature smelled different from the handlers. No fear stink, no aggression pheromones, just calm steadiness. The beast took one step closer, then another. Joe held perfectly still, hand extended, barely breathing. The massive head lowered close enough that he could feel the heat of its breath. One snap of those jaws and he would be dead. The dreadm's nose touched his palm. Joe felt the leathery texture of its snout, hot and dry. He did not pull away. He did not make any sudden movements. And then, very carefully, he let his fingers gently stroke the side of the beast's jaw. Good, he whispered. That's so good. You're being so brave. And then, almost without thinking, he said the words that would change everything. Words he had spoken to 1,000 frightened animals in his career. Words that carried the weight of genuine affection. Kagan AI, he said in Korean. Then in the common tongue, so the observers could hear, who's a good boy? The dreadm went very still. No one had ever called it good before. No one had ever touched it without causing pain. This small, weak creature was petting it, speaking to it with kindness in his voice, treating it like it was something valuable instead of something to be broken. The massive beast did something it had never done in captivity. It lowered its head further, pressing gently against Joe's chest, and closed its eyes. In the observation gallery, absolute silence reigned. Emperor Vakthal stood up from his throne, unable to believe what he was seeing. Krellin's face had gone pale. The most dangerous predator in imperial custody was nuzzling against a human like a domesticated pet. Joe kept his movements slow and careful. He examined the wounds he could see, noting which ones looked infected and which ones were causing the most pain. The beast allowed this, trusting this strange, gentle creature in a way it had never trusted anyone before. "I'm going to help you," Joe promised. "But I need medical supplies, and I need them to stop hurting you. Can you trust me to come back?" The dreadm, of course, did not understand the specific words, but it understood the tone. It understood that this creature meant it no harm. When Joe stood up and walked toward the exit, the beast did not attack. It watched him go with those amber eyes, and something in its expression had changed. The force field closed behind Joe. He was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading, but he stood straight as he faced the Emperor. "The beast is not vicious," Joe said clearly. "It's traumatized. Your handlers used pain-based training on a creature intelligent enough to remember every instance of torture. It learned that all authority figures mean pain, so it defends itself. Give me proper medical supplies in 1 week, and I can prove that cooperation works better than coercion." Emperor Vakthal studied the human for a long moment. This small, weak-looking creature had just accomplished what the galaxy's best beastmasters could not. It was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. "You will have your week," the Emperor decided. "Kelvin, assign this human quarters adjacent to the beast's enclosure. Provide him with whatever medical supplies he requests. If the human succeeds, we will present his methods at the Grand Summit. If he fails," the Emperor's smile showed many sharp teeth, "we will need a new human liaison." Joe bowed. "Thank you, Your Majesty. But I have one more request." The court held its collective breath. The human dared to ask for more. "I need to give the beast a name," Joe said. "You can't build trust with something you only see as a weapon. It needs to know it's an individual, not just a tool." The Emperor considered this strange human logic. "Very well. What will you call my dreadm?" Joe thought for a moment, then smiled. "Duri. It means two in my language, because it has 2 hearts." He paused. "And because everyone deserves a second chance." That night, Joe moved into small quarters that connected directly to Duri's enclosure. Through the transparent wall, he could see the massive beast watching him arrange his belongings. When he settled down to sleep, Duri lay down as well, mirroring his position. For the first time since its capture, the dreadm slept peacefully. And in his quarters, Joe smiled. This was going to work. He knew it. Morning came to Throne Prime with 3 suns rising over the palace towers. Joe woke to find Duri already awake, watching him through the transparent wall. The massive beast's tail swayed slightly, an emotion Joe had learned to recognize as cautious interest rather than aggression. "Good morning," Joe said, stretching. "Good morning, Duri." The dreadm's ears perked up at its name. It was learning that the sounds this human made had meaning, that some of them were specifically for it. Joe entered the enclosure with a medical kit and food. He had spent half the night researching dreadm biology in the imperial databases, learning about their physiology and common health issues. The wounds on Duri's hide were worse than he had thought. Several were badly infected, and the pain must have been constant. "This is going to hurt a little," Joe warned, showing Duri the medical scanner. "But then it will feel better. I promise." He worked slowly, letting Duri sniff each instrument before using it. When he applied antiseptic to the worst wounds, the beast flinched but did not pull away. It trusted him enough to endure temporary pain for longer-term relief. As he worked, other humans stationed on Throne Prime came to observe. Joe, an engineer who maintained the palace's life support systems, pressed against the observation window with wide eyes. "Is that really a dreadm?" she asked in Korean. "The one that killed all those handlers?" "His name is Duri," Joe corrected, not looking away from his work. "And yes, same one. He just needed someone to treat him properly." Word spread quickly through the small Earth delegation. By midday, Hannah, a xenobiologist studying alien ecosystems, had joined Joe at the observation window. They watched as Joe played with Duri, using a reinforced ball to engage the beast's natural hunting instincts in a controlled, positive way. "This is incredible," Hannah breathed. "He's using classical conditioning and positive reinforcement. I didn't think it would work on something so aggressive." "Dury was never aggressive," Cho called out, having heard her through the speakers. "He was defensive. There's a difference." The two women looked at each other, then at their fellow human working fearlessly alongside a creature that terrified the entire imperial court. Pride swelled in their chests. Maybe Earth was not as insignificant as the galaxy thought. But not everyone was pleased with Cho's progress. Kelvin watched from his office with growing resentment. The Master of Beasts had built his entire reputation on the traditional imperial methods: pain, fear, and absolute dominance. If this human succeeded with gentleness, it would make Kelvin look like a fool. Worse, it might lead others to question the methods he had used for 40 years. On the third day, Krellin petitioned Emperor Vakthal directly. "My lord, I must advise against this human's continued involvement with your war beast," Krellin said, bowing low. "His methods are making the creature soft. A war beast must be fierce, must be feared. This human treats it like a pet. And yet the creature obeys him," the Emperor pointed out. "It has not killed him. It allows him to tend its wounds. It even plays with him, I am told." "Exactly my concern, sire. The Dreadm is meant to strike terror in your enemies. What will they think if they see it acting gentle? It undermines imperial strength." The Emperor leaned back in his throne, considering. "You raise a valid point, Krell. Very well. 5 days remain before the Grand Summit. I will require a demonstration. The human must prove that his methods have not weakened the beast. Dury must perform combat maneuvers before the Imperial Council. If it fails, the human will be removed, and you will resume training with traditional methods." Krellin bowed deeper to hide his smile. "A wise decision, my lord. I am certain the test will reveal the flaws in the human approach." When Cho learned of the test, he felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Combat maneuvers meant complex commands, aggressive displays, precision movements. He had only been working with Dury for 3 days. Was that enough time? Joe and Hannah visited him that evening, bringing food from the human section of the palace kitchens. "You can do this," Joe said confidently. "We've been watching. Dury trusts you completely." "Trust isn't the problem," Joe replied, absently petting Dury's massive head. The beast had its chin resting on his lap as he sat on the enclosure floor. "The problem is that I don't know what the Imperial Council expects. What if they want him to attack something? I've been teaching him not to attack." Hannah pulled up a data pad. "I researched typical war beast demonstrations. They want to see controlled aggression, response to commands, and protective behavior. The beast should defend its handler while also obeying orders to stand down." Protective behavior. Joe looked down at Dury. "You'd protect me, wouldn't you, boy?" Dury's tail thumped against the floor. A gesture Joe had learned meant contentment. For the next 2 days, Joe worked intensively with Dury. He taught commands using hand signals and specific Korean words, reinforcing each successful response with treats and praise. He introduced mock threats using training drones, teaching Dury to distinguish between actual danger and harmless stimuli. Most importantly, he taught the stand-down command, a way to call off Dury's defensive responses instantly. The beast learned with surprising speed. Dreadm were intelligent, Joe discovered. They had simply never been trained with methods that respected that intelligence. Every handler before had assumed the creatures were too savage to learn anything except through pain. On the 5th day, Joe felt almost ready. Almost. Dury could perform most of what would be required. But there was still an element of uncertainty. The Imperial Council would be a strange environment full of unfamiliar scents and sounds. Would Dury remain focused? Would the bond they had built hold under pressure? That night, as Cho tried to sleep, he heard movement in the enclosure. Dury had approached the transparent wall, pressing close to where Cho lay on the other side. The massive beast settled down, positioning itself so that only the wall separated them. A guardian. Cho realized Dury was guarding him while he slept. The thought brought tears to his eyes. This creature, tortured and traumatized, had learned to trust again. It had chosen Joe as its pack, its family. That meant something more profound than any demonstration could show. But what Joe did not know was that Krellin had no intention of letting the demonstration proceed fairly. That same night, the Master of Beasts visited the food preparation area where Duri's meals were stored. From a concealed container, he produced a small vial of pale powder. It was a stimulant commonly used to agitate war beasts before battle. In controlled doses, it increased aggression and fighting spirit. In larger doses, it caused uncontrollable rage and violent behavior. The substance was banned for use in demonstrations precisely because it made creatures unpredictable and dangerous. Krell measured out 3 times the normal dosage and mixed it into Duri's morning meal. The timing was perfect. The drug would take effect just as the demonstration began. The beast would rampage, would attack anything near it, possibly even the human who had tamed it. The Emperor would see that trust-based methods were fatally flawed. The human would be discredited, possibly killed, and Kelvin's traditional approach would be vindicated. He sealed the container and left no evidence. By this time tomorrow, everything would return to how it should be. Pain and fear would reign supreme once more. The morning of the demonstration arrived. Joe woke with nervous energy. Duri seemed calm, even eager. The beast had learned to associate Joe's presence with positive experiences. It was ready to show what they had accomplished together. Joe fed Duri the prepared meal, noticing nothing amiss. The food was slightly different than usual, but he assumed the palace kitchens had simply provided a special ration for demonstration day. As they walked toward the Imperial Amphitheater, Joe practiced the commands one more time. Duri responded perfectly, ears alert, focused entirely on its handler. Joe and Hannah waited at the entrance, offering encouragement. "You've got this," Joe said. "Show them what Earth can do." The amphitheater was filled with hundreds of alien dignitaries, all the most important members of the Imperial Council. Emperor Vakthal sat in the central box, flanked by his advisors. Krell stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral. Joe led Duri into the arena. The crowd murmured with anticipation. This was the beast that had killed 7 handlers, now walking calmly beside a human half its size. What none of them could see was the drug beginning to work in Duri's system. The chemical rage was slowly building in the beast's blood. The demonstration was about to go very, very wrong. The Imperial Amphitheater fell silent as Joe and Duri entered the arena floor. Thousands of eyes watched from the tiered seating, representing hundreds of species from across the galaxy. The Grand Summit had officially begun, and this demonstration was the opening spectacle. Emperor Vakthal had promised them a display of imperial power. What they saw instead was a human walking calmly beside the most dangerous predator in known space. Joe felt the weight of all those stares. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. Duri needed him to be calm. He glanced at the massive beast beside him and saw something that made him frown. Duri's pupils were starting to dilate. The beast's breathing seemed faster than normal. "Neon Grinch Anna?" Joe asked quietly in Korean. "You okay, boy?" Duri's tail lashed once, a sharp movement unlike its usual calm swaying. Something was wrong. The beast was agitated, and Joe could not understand why. They had practiced this. Duri had been perfectly calm just minutes ago. From the Emperor's box, an announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Citizens of the Imperium and honored guests, witness the power of Throne Prime. The dread tamed by human methods will now demonstrate its combat capabilities." Joe raised his hand, the signal for Duri to perform the first maneuver. The beast was supposed to circle him in a protective pattern. Instead, Duri took a stumbling step, shaking its massive head as if trying to clear it. In the viewing boxes, Krellin leaned forward, watching intently. The drug was taking effect faster than he had expected. "Perfect. Duri we own," Joe said firmly, giving the command again. "Circle." The beast tried to obey. It truly tried, but the chemical rage flooding its system was overwhelming its trained responses. Duri's vision was turning red at the edges. Its muscles tensed with artificial aggression. Every instinct screamed at it to attack, to fight, to kill. The beast roared suddenly, a sound of confusion and pain. The audience gasped. This was not part of the demonstration. Dury. Joe's voice was sharp now, commanding. Anya, sit. But Dury could not sit. The drug had fully activated, overriding conscious thought. The beast's eyes locked onto the nearest box of dignitaries, where ambassadors from the Kelvic sovereignty sat. Prey. The drug told Dury these were prey. The dread charged. Screams erupted throughout the amphitheater. Dignitaries scrambled for exits. Palace guards rushed forward, weapons powered up. In the emperor's box, Vakthal stood, his expression dark with fury. This was exactly the disaster he had feared. Kill it! Krellin shouted, his voice carrying across the arena. The beast has gone mad. Protect the ambassadors. Energy weapons whined to life. A dozen guards took aim at Dury, ready to cut the rampaging beast down. The first shots fired, burning into Dury's armored hide. The pain only drove the beast into greater frenzy. And that was when Joe did something that everyone later agreed was either the bravest or most foolish act they had ever witnessed. He ran toward the rampaging dread. Not away from it, toward it. And Dwayne, he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. No, Dury, stop. He threw himself between the charging beast and the diplomatic boxes, arms spread wide. Dury was moving at full speed, unstoppable momentum carrying it forward. The humans in the audience, Joe and Hannah, screamed Joe's name. This was suicide. The beast would crush him, tear him apart, not even notice as it trampled him. But then Dury heard its name. Through the drug-induced haze, through the chemical rage forcing it to attack, the beast heard that one word. That specific sound that meant it was not just a weapon, not just a monster, but an individual. A good boy. The massive creature tried to stop. Claws dug furrows in the arena floor. It was only feet away from Joe now. Too close. Too much momentum. Joe did not flinch. He stood his ground and said the words that had started everything. The words he had spoken during that first meeting when he had shown Dury that kindness existed in the universe. Cag and I, he said, his voice somehow steady despite his terror. Who's a good boy? Time seemed to slow. Dury's amber eyes met Joe's. In that moment, the beast had a choice. The drug demanded violence. Every chemical signal in its body screamed to attack. But deeper than the drug, deeper than the artificial rage, was something the Dreadm had never experienced before in its life. Trust, love, the knowledge that this small, fragile creature cared about it. The Dreadm fought, not against Joe, but against itself, against the poison in its veins. It was the hardest battle Dury had ever fought, harder than any combat in the Deathworld arenas where it had been captured. This was a war inside its own mind. The arena held its breath. Dury's massive head lowered, coming to rest against Joe's chest. The beast trembled violently, every muscle straining, but it did not attack. It chose Joe over the rage. It chose trust over violence. The beast's legs gave out, and it collapsed at Joe's feet. Absolute silence filled the amphitheater. 10,000 beings stared in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. A creature bred for killing, drugged into madness, had stopped itself from attacking through sheer force of will. For a human, Joe dropped to his knees beside Dury, running his hands over the trembling beast. In Mujalissa, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. You did so well. I'm so proud of you. Emperor Vakthal descended from his box, walking across the arena floor with measured steps. His expression was unreadable. When he reached Joe and Dury, he gestured for a medical team to approach. Scan the beast, he commanded. I want to know why it behaved that way. The medical technician ran scanners over Dury's body. Within moments, his face went pale. My lord, there are high levels of rage stimulants in the creature's bloodstream. Someone drugged it. The Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Who had access to the beast's food? All eyes turned to Kelvin. The master of beasts tried to maintain his composure, but guilt was written across his face. He had not expected the drug to be detected. He had not expected the human to survive. Kelvin. The Emperor's voice was ice and steel. Did you sabotage this demonstration? The old handler knew he was caught. He could lie, but the evidence was clear. Instead, he chose defiance. I did what was necessary to preserve imperial strength. This human's methods make us weak. A war beast should be feared, not loved. Pain and dominance have served the Imperium for millennia. We cannot abandon our ways for the soft sentimentality of a species that has barely left its own world. You endangered my guests, the Emperor said quietly. Deadly quiet. You sabotaged my demonstration. You nearly caused a diplomatic incident that could have shattered the Grand Summit before it truly began. And worst of all, you proved yourself wrong. Krell blinked. My lord, look at the beast. Emperor Vakthal pointed at Duri, still collapsed beside Joe. You drugged it with enough stimulants to drive 3 Dreadm into a frenzy. Yet it stopped. Not because of pain, not because of fear, but because of the bond this human built with it. Your methods broke its body and spirit. His methods gave it a reason to fight its own nature. The Emperor turned to face the assembled dignitaries. Let this be a lesson to all who witness. True strength is not forcing something to obey through pain. True strength is earning such loyalty that a creature will battle its own drugged mind to protect that bond. He looked down at Joe, still kneeling beside Duri. Human, you spoke of giving the beast a second chance. I now see that you have given the Imperium something far more valuable. You have shown us that there is strength in compassion. That partnership can achieve what domination cannot. The Emperor's voice rang across the silent amphitheater. Krellin, you are hereby stripped of your rank and position. You will be escorted from the palace and banned from any work involving beast handling. As for you, Joe of Earth, I name you Chief Handler of Imperial Beasts. You will reform our training programs and teach your methods to those who wish to learn them. Your species may be new to our galaxy, but you have much to teach us. Kelvin was led away by guards, his face twisted with bitterness. The assembled dignitaries began to murmur among themselves, processing what they had witnessed. Many were already calculating how to request human handlers for their own worlds. Joe and Hannah rushed down from the stands, embracing Joe as medical teams began treating Duri's wounds and purging the drugs from its system. The humans held each other, crying and laughing at the same time. They had come to the palace as minor representatives of an insignificant world. Now Earth's gentle approach to the galaxy's hardest problems had earned them respect they never imagined possible. As consciousness slowly returned to Duri, the beast's eyes opened to find Joe still beside it. Despite the pain, despite the lingering effects of the drug, Duri's tail managed a weak thump against the ground. Good boy, the gesture said. Am I still a good boy? Joe smiled through his tears and the best boy, he promised. Always the best boy. 3 months after the incident at the Grand Summit, Joe stood in the newly renovated Imperial Beast Academy, watching the first class of students practice the techniques he had taught them. Handlers from 15 different species worked with creatures that had previously been considered untrainable. Where the old training grounds had echoed with the sounds of pain and fear, now there was something different. The sound of progress built on patience. Duri lay at Joe's side, fully recovered from the drug incident. The massive Dreadm had become a fixture around the academy, often helping demonstrate proper bonding techniques. Young handlers would nervously approach, and Duri would gently lower its head, allowing them to touch its armored hide. The beast that had killed 7 handlers was now teaching the next generation that gentleness did not mean weakness. Joe entered the observation deck carrying a datapad filled with messages. You're not going to believe the requests we're getting, she said, scrolling through the list. The Kelvic sovereignty wants human advisors for their military animal programs. The Torgoth Collective is asking about applying your methods to their security beasts. Even the Vin Empire, and they hate asking anyone for help. Joe raised his eyebrows. Really? Earth stock is rising fast, Hannah added, joining them. She had been appointed as the Academy's chief xenobiologist, studying how human animal handling principles could be adapted for different species. The diplomatic corps back home is overwhelmed. Everyone wants to know how we tamed the untamable beast. I didn't tame Dury, Joe corrected, scratching behind the Dreadm's ears. I just treated him like he mattered, like he was more than a weapon. Below them, a Kelvic handler named Raltek was working with a spike-backed predator from his home world. The creature had been brought to the academy after injuring 3 trainers. Raltek was using the techniques Joe had taught, sitting patiently while the beast circled him, offering food without forcing approach. It was slow work, but it was working. It's spreading faster than we expected, Joe observed. Your methods? I mean, some species are resistant, but the results speak for themselves. Bonded beasts show better performance, longer service lives, and fewer handler casualties. The numbers don't lie. Joe nodded, watching Raltek. The Kelvic was naturally aggressive as a species, used to dominating everything around them. Seeing him practice patience, practice gentleness was remarkable. Change was happening, but not everyone welcomed that change. A group of former handlers who followed Krellin's traditional methods had formed what they called the True Way Alliance. They spread messages throughout the Imperium, claiming that human methods were making the military weak, and that war beasts trained with kindness would fail in actual combat. Some worlds had banned the new techniques entirely, considering them corrupted thinking from an inferior species. Joe tried not to let it bother him. Change always faced resistance. What mattered was that he was making a difference, one handler and one beast at a time. A summons from Emperor Vakthal arrived that afternoon. Joe made his way to the private imperial chambers, Dury walking beside him. The palace guards no longer raised their weapons when the Dreadm approached. They had learned that the beast was perfectly safe unless Joe was threatened. The Emperor was reviewing star charts when Joe entered. Vakthal gestured for him to sit, a casual invitation that would have shocked the old imperial court. The Emperor treating a human as an equal was still something many struggled to accept. Your academy is performing beyond expectations, the Emperor said without preamble. Handler injury rates are down 60% across worlds that have adopted your methods. Beast longevity has increased by 40%. These are remarkable improvements. Thank you, Your Majesty, but I can't take all the credit. Joe and Hannah have. I did not summon you here to discuss statistics, the Emperor interrupted, though not unkindly. I want to discuss philosophy. Joe blinked, surprised. Philosophy, my lord? The Imperium was built on certain principles, Vakthal explained, his claws tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. Strength through domination, order through fear. We conquered species, we subjugated worlds, and we maintained control through superior force. For 10,000 years, this approach worked. The Emperor stood, walking to a window that overlooked the capital city. And then you arrived with your strange human ideas, and suddenly I questioned everything. He turned toward Joe. You showed me that the Dreadm obeyed not because it feared you, but because it loved you, that it fought its own drugged mind because it did not want to disappoint you. That level of loyalty cannot be beaten into a creature. It must be earned. Every being wants to matter, Joe said quietly. Whether they're animals or people, they want to know that they're valued, that they're more than just tools. When you treat someone that way, when you give them genuine respect and care, they'll do anything for you. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And if I applied these principles beyond beast handling? The Emperor asked, turning to face him. To how we govern, to how we treat member species, to how we maintain the Imperium itself. Joe felt the weight of that question. This was dangerous territory. He was being asked to comment on imperial policy, to suggest changes to a civilization that had existed for millennia. But the Emperor was asking sincerely, genuinely interested in the answer. Earth has a saying. Joe began carefully. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. It means that kindness is often more effective than cruelty. I'm not saying the Imperium should abandon all strength or become weak. But strength and compassion aren't opposites. The strongest bonds are built on mutual respect, not fear. The Emperor considered this for a long moment. The True Way Alliance would call such thinking corrupted. They say you are making us soft. Dury stopped himself from killing while drugged with enough rage stimulants to drive him mad. Joe pointed out. That took more strength than any amount of violence. Real strength is having the power to destroy something, but choosing not to. That's what I've been teaching. You speak wisdom beyond your years, human. The Emperor returned to his seat. I have decided to expand your role. You will not only reform the Beast Handler program, but will serve as an advisor on cultural integration. Too many of our member species feel subjugated rather than allied. Perhaps your approach can help bridge those gaps. I'm just a veterinarian from Seoul, Joe protested. I'm not a politician or a cultural expert. You are someone who sees value in all creatures, who treats even the most dangerous predator with dignity. That is exactly the perspective the Imperium needs. The Emperor's expression softened slightly. Besides, you have already changed imperial policy simply by being yourself. You might as well do it officially. Over the following years, the changes became more pronounced. The Academy's methods spread to dozens of worlds. Stories of the human who tamed the Emperor's beast became legend, inspiring handlers across the galaxy. More humans were recruited from Earth. Their expertise in animal behavior was suddenly valued throughout the Imperium. But the real transformation happened quietly in small moments. A Kelvic commander choosing to negotiate with rebels instead of massacring them, citing Cho's lesson that respect earned better results than fear. A Vin administrator implementing welfare programs for subject species, remembering how the human had cared for a creature that could have killed him. 1,000 small decisions, each influenced by the principle that power did not require cruelty. The True Way Alliance continued its resistance, even attempting several incidents meant to discredit human methods. But each time, the evidence proved them wrong. Bonded war beasts performed better in combat simulations. Peacefully integrated colonies showed higher productivity. Species treated as partners rather than subjects contributed more willingly to imperial defense. 5 years after that first meeting with Dury, Joe found himself in the same arena where the demonstration had gone wrong. But this time, it was filled with graduates from the Academy. Hundreds of handlers who had learned his methods had brought their bonded beasts, creatures of every type from across the Imperium. Joe and Hannah stood with him, both now holding important positions in the expanded program. More humans had arrived from Earth, specialists in different fields, all building on the foundation Joe had laid. We did it, Joe said softly, looking at the assembled handlers. We actually changed the galaxy. Not me, Joe corrected. We, all of us. And it started because one scared animal just needed someone to care. Dury, now graying around the muzzle but still powerful, rested his massive head on Joe's shoulder. The Dreadm had aged, but the bond between them had only grown stronger. They had been through so much together, had weathered opposition and danger, and had proved that there was strength in gentleness. Emperor Vakthal addressed the gathered crowd, speaking of the transformation the Imperium had undergone. He spoke of the human paradigm, of how one species' approach to the smallest interactions had rippled outward to affect the largest policies. He spoke of Joe, who had walked unarmed into a cage with the most dangerous predator in the galaxy and walked out with a friend. Later, as the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Joe sat quietly with Dury in a corner of the arena. Joe and Hannah had gone to celebrate with other Earth personnel. For a moment, it was just the human and the beast like that first day. Ajigo Kaganaya, Joe said, scratching behind Dury's ears. You're still a good boy. Dury's tail thumped against the ground, the same gesture that had started it all. Despite the years, despite the fame and the changes and the politics, this simple truth remained. A human had asked, "Who's a good boy?" And a beast had answered with a lifetime of loyalty. Across the Imperium, in training centers and bonding facilities on 1,000 worlds, other voices were asking the same question. Now, other handlers were learning that cruelty was not strength, that fear was not respect, and that the strongest bonds were built on trust. The Emperor's beast had refused every handler until the human said those magic words, and in saying them, in meaning them, Joe had changed not just one creature's life, but the course of galactic civilization. Sometimes the softest words carry the greatest strength. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can echo across the stars. And sometimes the most important question in the universe is just, who's a good boy? The answer Joe had learned was always the same. They all were. Every creature, every being, every soul just wanted to be seen, valued, and loved. And when you gave them that, they would move worlds for you. Not because they feared you, but because you had shown them that they mattered. That was the human paradigm, and it was changing everything.